police officers of Reddit, what's the best case of instant karma you deliver to an a-hole driver on the highway? My stepdad was a difficult man. He always held me to a higher standard than he held himself. I was always wrong and he was always right. So one day we were headed to get breakfast at a cafe in our small town called Banner Elk. The cafe was actually in a double wide trailer just one block from the only stoplight in town. As we drove, my stepdad grew irritated because the car in front of us was going slow. Typical of him, he decided to tailgate the car in front. I was a passenger and I noticed the driver ahead looking in his rearview mirror a few times. Suddenly, all the lights on the car flashed, reverse lights, third brake light, everything. I thought it was strange, so I looked more closely. It was a Dodge Intrepid with flashing lights, weird extra antennas on the roof, and a strange license plate. That's when I realized it was an unmarked cop car. I told my stepdad, "That's a cop." I decided to let this play out. I said nothing more about what I had observed. A few moments later, the car in front pulled off the road and then immediately pulled back onto the road behind us. Now, I was certain my stepdad was going to get what was coming to him. As I suspected, it was a cop and he was angry. My stepdad finally realized this and, seeing that I was right, decided it was a good time to put on the seatbelt he never wore. With one hand on the wheel and two eyes on the rearview mirror, he had no hands or eyes to manage the curve ahead. We crossed over the center line into oncoming traffic. The cop had seen enough and turned on his lights. And I started laughing, uncontrollable, belly-busting laughter. This guy was about to get what he deserved. But it turned out even better than I thought. So we pull over, the cop approaches and starts talking, then suddenly commands, "Sir, step out of the vehicle, now." I was actually a bit scared at this point, like, what was going on? The cop made my stepdad spread him against the car hood, then came back to where I was sitting and retrieved the weapon my stepdad kept between the seat and the stick shift. The cop placed the weapon on the roof and proceeded to pat down and lecture my stepdad. And did I mention all of this was happening directly in front of the local cafe where the entire town had breakfast? Needless to say, the cop was not impressed, and I got to see the man who made my life hell treated like the criminal I knew he was. It was great. Story 2. It was more the universe delivering karma than me, but still. Once at a traffic accident, I was directing cars around a roundabout because the road ahead was completely blocked by the incident. One car pulled up and stopped directly in front of me. The driver opened his window to ask something, completely blocking me from the view of the other traffic. I moved to the side and shouted, "I'm sorry, I can't stop to discuss anything. That road's closed. Please move off the roundabout." He drove a few meters forward, blocking me again, and continued shouting through his window. I didn't catch anything or everything he said, but it included an angry, "Why can't you just stop and speak to the people you're meant to be serving?" At that moment, another car promptly rear-ended him as the driver hadn't expected him to stop dead on an otherwise clear roundabout. That's why, I thought. I made sure to write up the incident clearly so the insurance companies would know who to blame. Yes, the universe always working in beautiful ways. Now in the US, it would have been the driver that rear-ended him at fault. You should never be following so closely that you can't avoid the car in front of you, right? Still, insurance companies automatically blame the guy who did the rear-ending. Story 3. This wasn't my story, but one from a cop buddy of mine years ago. He was about 6'6" and on the SWAT team. A really nice guy, but definitely not someone you'd want to mess with. One day, he was driving home from work in his personal car, a small sports car. Behind him was a 20-something guy who kept tailgating, backing off, and then speeding up to tailgate again. All of this was happening in packed rush-hour traffic on a 3-lane freeway. My buddy Jim was watching all of this in his rearview mirror, anticipating what was coming next. Sure enough, the guy rear-ended him. They pulled over to the shoulder and Jim just sat in his car. The guy, whom Jim nicknamed the Redneck, got out of his vehicle, shouting and cursing, threatening to confront Jim. Just before he reached the car, Jim got out. He unfolded his 6'6" frame, still wearing his full black tactical gear, and simply stared at him. The guy literally wet himself. Ha! Nothing like watching a wannabe tough guy's bladder give out faster than his ego. Also, pro tip, before you threaten to throw hands, make sure the other guy doesn't look like he throws small cars for fun. Story 4. I'm a border patrol agent near a few 2-lane highways with limited opportunities to pass due to all the hills and curves. I regularly pull over older people driving motorhomes at 45 miles per hour and 65 mile per hour zones. And the reason being they often have a line of 20-plus vehicles behind them trying to pass. One couple I pulled over was particularly upset about being stopped. When I told them there was a line of cars behind them trying to pass, they got all annoyed and told me I wasn't a real cop and to go mind my own business. Their records came back clean, so I sent them on their way. About 20 minutes later, I saw them on the side of the road with smoke billowing out the back of their camper. Another agent and I pulled in behind them to help. As I grabbed the fire extinguisher from my car, the elderly passenger shouted, "Help! He dropped his lighter in the back." I went into the back of the trailer to help the old man battling the blaze. I managed to put out most of the fire inside, but it had caught the insulation or something, so the fire was on the outside of the camper too. The old man asked if I would give him a hand with it. I said, "I don't know, I'm not a real firefighter." Alright, so people who don't pull over with a long line of cars behind them are the worst. Also, his response at the end was golden because he really wasn't a real firefighter, you know? And as if it weren't bad enough mouthing off to a cop, but mouthing off to a border patrol agent takes some guts. Story 5. I'm not a police officer, but I work in transportation. These stories reminded me of a time I was helping direct traffic in an area where we had a water main break. I had two lanes merging into one behind me, so I'd let one lane go for a bit, then stop to let the other lane go. About 20 cars back, I could see this guy in a BMW hopping back and forth between whichever lane I was allowing to go. He finally crept his way to second in line, and just as I was letting the lane next to him go, he tried to cut over on someone. The moment he did, I put my hand up and stopped him, then let the other lane go. He was absolutely infuriated. I could see it in his eyes. He then tried to get into the lane I was allowing to go, but I got to give him the old, "Nope, you're going nowhere." When he finally did get to go, he stared me down as he drove by. It was satisfying to put him in his place. Story 6. I've got one that happened less than a month ago. I'm a police dispatcher, so I was witness to it all going down. A motorcycle cop, one generally disliked, unlike most of the other cops at our department, was running a stationary radar at a stupidly busy intersection. Being on a bike, he couldn't sit in his car and wait for his info to come back, so he mostly ran it himself to make the process faster. What he looked for was to see if the driver was already in our system and if they had a license. As dispatchers, we are a bit more thorough and check if they are wanted. The officer on the scene can only see if they're wanted through our city, not surrounding ones or other states. This guy was speeding and blew a stop sign. He also had a suspended driver's license and no insurance. So his car was towed on the spot and he was told to start walking. The guy didn't even make it a block. He was angry and swore up and down that it was solely because he was black. He came up with a brilliant plan: find out if the cop has a family and threaten them. Now, the cop has a fairly unique last name, and despite internal memos to not use real names on social media like Facebook, our officer used his real name. The guy found it fast, and his account was public. The guy saved a picture of the officer's kid and sent it to him via a Facebook message with the caption, "Bang." The cop saw this and decided, what in the actual heck? And pressed charges for threats or inciting violence, or something along those lines. Now there's a warrant out for the guy's arrest because, well, he's stupid. To get a warrant, you also have to check to see if they have a record and if they're wanted anywhere else. And guess what? The guy turned out to be a predator and was wanted in another state. So from start to finish, it took maybe 6 hours in the middle of the morning when they arrested him at his baby mama's house. Story 7. My best story is about an ex who was a cop. Terrible boyfriend, but a great cop. He worked the graveyard shift, so he usually finished around 2 a.m., unless he had court, which sometimes let him leave a little early. One morning, he was on his way to court in his personal car, still in full uniform. He was pretty happy because he thought the guy he was supposed to testify against wouldn't show up, meaning he'd get extra time to sleep and still get paid for showing up. He exited on Expressway 676 for the Philly folks and was making a right turn. At this intersection, there were several eastbound lanes. The expressway was slightly lower than the city streets, so there was a street matching it on both sides, eastbound and westbound. The two farthest left lanes were from the ground level street and were straight-only lanes. Then there was a median, followed by two more straight-only lanes from the expressway off-ramp, another median, and finally two right-turn lanes from the expressway off-ramp. The only permissible turn at this light was if you had just exited the expressway and were in the two far right lanes. That's it. The other 4 lanes continued straight. However, some entitled guy decided he was more important than the morning rush hour traffic, I made a right turn from the far left lane through a red light, crossing 3 straight only lanes and 1.5 right turn lanes. Would have been both, but my friend's car was in his way. The guy didn't even have a chance to get out of his car before my friend jumped out of his vehicle and ran full speed toward him with a weapon in his hand because he thought the guy might be intoxicated or crazy. He reached the guy's car and the dude inside was terrified. Imagine trying to pull off an illegal turn, causing an accident, and then hitting a cop in uniform. My friend yelled at him through his closed window, "You've got to be kidding me." The ironic thing is, I'm absolutely certain the driver was saying the same exact thing when he saw my friend's uniform. And here's what happened next. My friend filled out an incident report while waiting for on-duty officers to arrive. He handed the report to them instead of talking, which made him late for court. Fortunately, the defendant didn't show up, so he ended up getting a free meal, I think at Applebee's. Alright, so if you're enjoying the video so far, don't forget to hit that subscribe and like button for more videos like this. Story 8. I'm not a cop, but I witnessed this one firsthand. I pulled into a convenience store down the street from where I work on my way home. I saw the security guard from work at a gas pump. I parked my car, got out, and greeted the security guard. This guy seemed to have a lot of problems following him around. He had just gotten off work at the same time as me and was in a foul mood. I wished him a better day and grabbed what I came for, proceeding to the register, but he was already there, yelling. Something about how they were incompetent for not being able to figure out how to turn on the gas pump or something. He went off on these poor people. I noted he was still in his work uniform making a scene like this. Not cool. Anyway, his rant went on for about 30 seconds. While I thought about stepping in on the clerk's behalf, I refrained because this guy was clearly unstable and I still had to see him at work. Finally, he finished his rant and stormed out. I approached the cash register and purchased some goods and 2 of their finest lotto tickets. We completed the financial transactions. Then there was a sound of squealing tires. The aforementioned security guard had decided that doing a couple of donuts between the gas pumps and the store would be an appropriate addition to his rant. He narrowly missed my car on 2 occasions. Apparently deciding that 2 was the right number of donuts in this situation, he straightened out his wheel and headed for the exit. It turned out the assistant manager had been in the manager's office during all this chaos and she was on the phone. As soon as the security guy exited the gas station, a county sheriff turned on his lights right behind him. He had been coming in the other entrance in response to the phone call. When I left, they had him up against his car, putting cuffs on him. When I returned to work, the dude was no longer employed there. Nobody confirmed it, since discussing employee circumstances or firings isn't something that happens. But it seemed he was in a foul mood due to being fired. Double whammy, I guess. Anyway, the next security guard was even worse. Took 2 months to get rid of that one. The guy did not respond well to being called a fascist. Story 9. I'm not a police officer, but several years ago, a highway patrol officer provided a beautiful bit of instant karma for which I never got to thank him. It was the last few days before Christmas, so the freeways were packed with people eager to get to the stores for their holiday shopping. Every day on my commute home, I encountered at least one accident on the freeway that blocked up traffic. I was crawling in the leftmost lane when a car abruptly cut in front of me. No signals, just taking advantage of the reasonable following distance I had left to the car ahead in the stop-and-go traffic. I was alert but had to tap my brakes, keeping an eye on the police car behind me in the mirror. Then the guy who cut me off swerved over and crossed the double yellow lines to get into the HOV lane. I'd seen that sort of thing before and found myself wishing there had been a highway patrol officer around to witness it. Immediately, the lights behind me came on. Traffic stopped in the HOV lane as a highway patrol car entered. I couldn't help but smile as I watched in my rearview mirror as the officer began to escort the other vehicle off the freeway. It was quite a maneuver to cross all that traffic, and the driver was probably already in a hurry. Ain't it always satisfying when reckless behavior on the road gets promptly addressed, especially during the hectic holiday season? Story 10. My mom and I were driving on a 2-lane highway in New Mexico once. The speed limit was slower than most highways, around 60 miles per hour or so. There were quite a few cars ahead of us and this Jeep was riding our tail. We were already going about 65, so I didn't know what his deal was. The Jeep suddenly decided to try and pass us and all the cars in front of us. What he didn't know was that there was a cop a few cars ahead that my mom and I had already spotted. As soon as he pulled into the other lane and started speeding up, I got excited knowing what was about to happen next. Sure enough, the Jeep slammed on his brakes as soon as he saw the cop, but it was too late. The cop turned his lights on, slowed down to allow the Jeep in front of him, and pulled him over. It was awesome. I hate when people ride my tail when I'm already going over the speed limit. It makes it worth it though when they get pulled over for it. Yeah, that moment when the tailgater gets what's coming to them? Priceless. Story 11. Guess what? Not a cop. Anyway, there I was, just cruising along peacefully on a typical morning routine. I had dropped off my older son at school and had my youngest happily chatting away in the back seat. The sun was shining, birds chirping, the usual scene. Out of nowhere, this reckless driver decides to play bumper cars and slams right into the front driver's side of my truck. The impact was jarring like a thunderclap in the quiet morning air. My heart skipped a beat as I instinctively slammed on the brakes and came to a sudden stop. The other driver, clearly at fault, also comes to a stop. Shaken and trying to process what just happened, I quickly check on my son. Thank goodness he's safe and sound, even though he was a bit startled too. With a sigh of relief, I turned my attention to the other vehicle. Mr. Can't Drive for Crap is there, looking equally stunned, but also looking guilty. Before I can gather my thoughts, the guy suddenly reverses and speeds off down the street. My jaw drops in disbelief. It's a freaking hit and run. Thankfully, the universe had my back that day. A few minutes later, the reassuring sight of flashing lights appears in my rearview mirror. The cop arrives on scene, walks up to my window with a grin on his face, and holds up a license plate that the guy had left behind. Sweet justice. He didn't get away with it. The rest of the day unfolded in a blur of paperwork, insurance calls, and repairs, but the silver lining? My truck got fixed up good as new, and the memory of that hit and run faded into just another crazy story from the morning commute. Story 12. Not a cop, but here's my instant karma story. It was a typical rush hour morning, and I was navigating through traffic on my way to work, keeping to the speed limit and patiently waiting my turn to change lanes. As I signaled and checked my rearview mirror, I noticed a pickup truck speeding towards me, easily going 60 kilometers an hour over the limit. In a split second, I swerved back into my lane, narrowly avoiding a collision, and couldn't help but think, where's a cop when you need one? Just then, like a scene out of a movie, a police car emerged from the on-ramp behind the speeding pickup. For a moment, hope surged that justice might prevail. However, luck seemed to favor the reckless driver as the pickup slowed to a stop at a red light and the police car passed by without noticing the speeding violation. But the drama wasn't over yet. Seemingly impatient, the pickup driver decided not to wait for the light to change. Instead, with a daring move, he drove onto the sidewalk to make a right turn, clearly violating traffic rules in the process. And as fate would have it, the flashing lights and blaring sirens of the police car immediately followed, signaling the driver to pull over. A wave of satisfaction washed over me as I witnessed karma catch up with the reckless driver right before my eyes. Story 13. Back in the late 1970s, there was a notorious scam involving local cops. They had set up a 45-mile-per-hour speed limit sign on an interstate where the legal limit was 55. Their tactic was simple: pull over out-of-state cars, issue hefty fines, and demand a cash bond for release. And if anyone dared to contest, they were conveniently directed to see the judge, who happened to be the cop's brother-in-law. One day, a mid-20s black man driving a sleek sedan with an out-of-state plate fell victim to this trap. Knowing his rights, he calmly pointed out what was happening was illegal. In response, he found himself in cuffs, being escorted to see the judge. The judge swiftly fined him $50, but the young man refused to pay. Infuriated by his defiance, the judge sentenced him to 5 days in jail on the spot, denying him any access to a phone call or legal counsel. 5 long days later, the young man emerged from his unjust incarceration, but he wasn't finished. He returned a week later, accompanied by several of his colleagues, each armed with arrest warrants for the sheriff and the judge. As it turned out, the young man was an FBI agent en route to his new assignment. The local authorities had unknowingly picked a fight with the wrong person. Oops, indeed. Alright, so, if you liked any of these stories, here's more for you. YouTube thinks you're going to love this. I'll catch you in that video, and thanks for hanging with me on this one.